Stage 3 of the 2021 season is now fully up and running, and after some great games from week 1, the expectations were high heading into the second round of matches. Would our new signings continue to flourish? Would the underdogs of each region be able to play spoilers to the big dogs? And what teams would be able to rebound after a tough week 1? Stay tuned to find out. Thanks to every single one of you that has supported the channel in the last few months. It's always great motivation to see all the lovely comments and feedback on each video. I really do appreciate it. So if you go on to enjoy this video also, drop it a like. If this is your first time visiting the channel, then welcome and feel free to subscribe for more similar content. And if you have friends who also enjoy Rainbow Six Pro League, then go ahead and share it with them as we continue to grow our little community. Now without further ado, let's dive straight into it. Kicking off with the NAL once again, and the first playday of week 2 treated us to a big change in the regular proceedings as XSET beat Soniqs 7-3 on Coastline. Impressive considering Soniqs' competent win against SSG on Coastline the week before. XSET had finally found the turn of form they were looking for after struggling to find points for weeks across the majority of Stage 2 and the start of Stage 3. And I think XSET were a lot more measured on this map. They used the full time on the clock effectively, with lots of droning and patient angles being held, which worked against Soniqs, who often found themselves isolated, unable to get that direct trade on the players they were losing around the map. XSET exploited this, setting up their angles to cover the plant, something very encouraging for them as you could easily excuse lackluster objective play on Coastline. But we didn't see that, as they focused hard on getting the plant down and fully analysing with intel and long lines of sight the best opportunities to plant. New player Prod went for the plant 4 times on their attacking half with minimal answer from Soniqs, as XSET tactically found their way to an excellent 5-1 half. They continued to do fairly well at getting the opening pick, ending with that stat in their favour for 6 out of the 10 total rounds in the matchup, NVK being the one to credit this to mostly, with a 5-2 entry stat. But it was Creators having one of those great games we know he's capable of, as last season on Tempo Storm he was one of the more impressive players in the league, despite that roster's underwhelming performances. He ended the game as the top fragger, being 11-5, not too many flashy plays but a bunch of 2Ks, and to be honest, as much as flashy plays are fun to watch, XSET have been crying out for some consistency, and to see arguably their most talented player have a solid impact round to round was big for them on the road to collecting this first win of their third stage in the NAL. The final round was a hooker defense, and despite dropping into a 4v5 against a team like Soniqs who usually don't commit many mistakes and can suffocate you with that extra man advantage, the two previously mentioned stars of this show, NVK and Creators, each found double kills, as the time management just wasn't there for Soniqs, unable to get a grip on the XSET players in and around site, being shot from undroned positions and angles they weren't able to actively hold due to there only being 20 seconds or so left on the clock. I think almost every viewer watching who doesn't have some sort of adherent bias felt really happy to see XSET win this game, especially against such a quality opponent, because a more well-rounded NAL league top to bottom consequently raises the entire level of international events at majors. Yes, it might not be XSET to push established teams like NIP and BDS etc. to the edge, but more results like this will undoubtedly raise the level of week in week out practice teams like SSG and DarkZero will have under their belt heading into these international events. Finally, after a long-awaited return, Canadian had made his way back to the broadcast in Playday 1 with a big win against Mirage, but the much more interesting game to look at was definitely their close and great game they had against TSM on Oregon the following night, as he and DarkZero just about closed out Team Solo Mid 8-7. No surprises that it was these teams to bring out the exotic ops in strategical fashion, as unfortunately for him, a one-tap from Hyper on Glaz just wasn't enough to make that op useful enough, still losing both rounds he was brought. But regardless, it was interesting to see Hyper flex on his ops compared to his usual Sophia or similar operators, as he ran all types of ops from that previously mentioned Glaz to the flank watch of Nomad, clearly DZ trying something different here. Honestly a big risk, as when Hyper is gunning, he's definitely one of the top 3 players in NAL in my opinion. TSM quite comfortably stacked up 5 rounds on defense, trading each other out effectively and playing behind their utility well on site after the initial fights around the map. They surprised most people with that 5-1 half, as Hyper was the only one on DZ that could really keep up with the highly skilled gun skill of TSM. But moving on to defense was what DZ needed, as players like Canadian specifically finally got onto the scoreboard in their first defense, where they could just play their holds instead of having to juggle moving through the map with droning, hitting their shots and problem solving the TSM setups. DZ continued to grow into the game with every player finding their feet, something I was happy about when watching, as this game was the game of the night and I wanted it to live up to expectations, and it did, as both teams now sat at 5 apiece, DZ arguably in the driver's seat after not losing a defense defense yet. TSM would need to match DZ's one round of the first half to at least force OT, or take the next two to win it outright. Funnily enough, it couldn't have been any closer, as both teams had the exact same amount of kills and deaths spread exactly equally to their opposition, something I don't think I've ever seen before. So weird. TSM did find that one attacking round, so now it was DZ's turn to replicate that first half and win their 5th defense to reach 6-6. And they did, with a nice kitchen retake as we headed to overtime again for DZ this season. Canadian had a big multi-kill and smart round for himself on Maestro as DZ found their first OT defense, and in their attacking round, a balls to the wall hot drop on Freezer Hatch and E-Box pinch worked, a risky but great call from Canadian as they stunned TSM and won another overtime for themselves, leaving themselves 2-0 so far, taking points directly off their rivals. A point for TSM, but more misery overall as despite a really close game, they fell victim to another loss against the top 4 team after their OXG loss last week. And overall, of course it was nice to see Canadian back, but specifically I like seeing how vocal he was every time they showed the DZ facecams. They had definitely had some good scrims as Canadian looked comfortable and used to the dynamic between the rest of his teammates. He knew what he was there for and filled his role very well. I can't wait to see DZ at the next major, which I reckon they will make if they keep up these performances to the standard they showed in this game. Moving on to the BR6, and despite NiP taking a rough OT loss to Santos on Villa the week before, somehow they found themselves on that same map again, this time against Team 1, the team who had wiped Empire out on that very same map as the final pick in the Mexico Major Finals, and NiP was stunned with a huge haymaker as Team 1 easily whitewashed them 7-0. 7-0s are so rare to see, especially in the BR6 where every team has what it takes to beat the other, let alone find a single round, so to be honest, seeing NiP look toothless here was really difficult to watch. More mistakes plagued them as they gave away the opening kill in every single one of the 7 rounds we saw, and committed mistakes we see out of non-tier 1 teams, the best example being Psycho in a 1v1 post plant fully allowing Lagonis to defuse. It truly was a shame to see, as the main thing really you could analyse out of this game was the mentality. Not that NiP wanted to lose, but they just didn't ask enough questions of what Team 1 was showing. NiP seemed to just be going through the motions and hoping it worked, not considering Team 1's counterplay and adapting with counterplay of their own, which they historically have been so good at doing. Adapting. More examples being attempts to plant in default positions in Aviator, denied by simple nitro lines and standard angles / swings that weren't being held. Fans of NiP, myself included, were just hoping that as they moved to defense, they would prove that the match was defender-sided, but it wasn't, as most of their losses on attack could be credited to their own lackluster performance, as they were swept off their feet by Team 1, collecting a flawless round and 7-0 and rubbing more salt in the wounds of NiP's difficult start to the 3rd and final stage of the season. Alamau spoke in the post-match interview that he was very confused at what had happened to NiP's Villa ability, as they went unbeaten for a long time there, and even towards the start of the season were a menace on this map, even when having to start on attack. Definitely things to work on mentally and strategically for NiP on Villa, and regardless of how Team 1 secured those 3 points, it was definitely some good momentum that they would have wanted heading into their game against MIBR in the following week. And on the next day, another underdog win was added to the long list of upsets in the last few years of the BR6, as INTZ edged out Team Liquid 8-7. We headed to Clubhouse, and Liquid banned Hibana and started on defense, and combined with the Thatcher ban from INTZ, it was vital that Liquid started their game strong with a good defensive half. INTZ however did a really good job with their roam clear, as Liquid didn't apply much pressure far away from the site lurking, and this allowed INTZ to surround the site quicker and find the opening pick with much more time still left on the clock to execute than what you would normally see if there was an extended or off-site roam on Clubhouse. Liquid realised they were being too passive and getting run over, so at 1-2 down, they went for the top floor roam for a basement defense, but INTZ couldn't be slowed down as their general roam clear was just too clean with or without actual roaming defenders, finding a third attacking round after easily killing the 3 top floor roamers with no response from Liquid. Liquid finally bounced back though and found 2 rounds to even the half at 3-3, having good teamwork to double peek the player on plat covering Thermite in default plant. And talking of Thermite, Transitioning halves, PSK was on Fragmite mode, not necessarily getting opening kills with that operator, but doing that really valuable thing good support players can do of finding picks in and around the site as the team is setting up to execute. He found a few nice multi-kills, top fragging the lobby with 10 kills by the time round 9 came round. Regardless though, neither team could get that decisive edge over the other as they traded rounds to an eventual overtime. The trend continued all the way to Max OT with an attacking basement round for both teams, and despite Liquid now fully gunning with 4 of their 5 players having double-digit kills, INTZ were somehow able to clutch a 3v4 having that favourable basement defense, as unfortunately for Liquid, they didn't pay enough respect to the clock after their successful roam clear, having no choice but to run through bottlenecks on Dirt Tunnel Door. I did say in my transfer video that it wouldn't surprise me if Liquid weren't as dominant as previously, having 2 new players and a slightly adjusted role spread and playstyle, but nothing should be taken from INTZ as Liquid were gunning as I said, and INTZ were able to not only keep pace but won better Liquid with that OT win. And that day was the day of 8-7s as NiP finally rebounded after a few tough losses on Villa, this time heading to Coastline to take on FURIA, the same team that had just defeated our major winners on that map only 1 week earlier. A big risk that paid off for the Ninjas in an 8-7 win, showing that they are not in complete freefall and maybe are having some specific issues on Villa itself. NiP looked so much more organised in this game. Funny it was on Coastline compared to Villa, as if the tables were reversed. But they had multiple rounds in this game where they did that well-known NiP thing of turning an opening pick into a dominant round win, barely losing any players on the way, something we weren't seeing as much this stage so far or at the Mexico Major. Every player was being much more cautious and understanding that 1 or 2 sloppy plays can be the difference between a win and a loss at this level against an opponent of furious caliber at this point in that team's trajectory. Both teams on their day are 2 of the most lethal squads on Coastline, and it was no surprise that we saw another close back and forth game all the way to Max OT. Throughout this time, we saw highs clutch 2 1vx scenarios as Sledge, multiple post-plant defuses from both teams, and eventually a win from NiP, who in round 15, just like our previously mentioned Liquid INTZ game where INTZ had the man disadvantage, the 4 members of NiP who had just lost their big player Pino to 15 kill top frag fantasy were able to deny enough drone intel with Mute and Mozzie's utility to hold out, a 4v5 turning into a 3v4 clutch as Kamikaze hit a great shot through the drone hole, followed by another one each from himself and Muzi, somehow left Rare with it all to do in a 1v3, which despite finding one, he couldn't do, locking in NiP's first victory of the stage, even if it wasn't the full 3 points and was just 2. As a big fan of NiP, despite it not being a dominant game, in a region like BR6, scrappy wins can be just as valuable, and I can only hope now that they start to heat up for the rest of the stage and head into the Copa Elite 6 and the November Major, a similar way to how they turned it on and out of nowhere after their stage 1 in the 6 Invitational. Heading over to EUL, and after a month or so of games since the Mexico Major, it feels good to be back covering my favourite team, Team BDS, as unlike usual, they were part of a very close game and 8-7 win against another French squad in EUL under their new org since Stage 3, Heroic. Chaoxis and the rest of the old Train Hard squad had made some roster changes in the off-season, as they welcomed Brazilian player Thunder to their new squad for No Error, and Shokri standing in for Durza, who has recently clarified that he is taking a temporary break from Siege for various reasons. The majority of this team are more than familiar with playing the stars of BDS after 2 full stages in EUL, along with many of the players clashing in the French League all the way back to the Tempera days of last season. So despite Heroic's disappointing 2021 campaign, it isn't a surprise that they would be one of the few teams to take any points off BDS, even if it is just 1 and not the maximum of 3. They know better than anybody that if you just sit back in default positions holding angles, BDS players will just walk forward, click your head and take you out the round, whether it's a 5v5 near the start of the round for the opening pick, or a 5v5 in the last 20 seconds as they're trying to hit site. Players like the ones on BDS can frustrate you easily as they can win gunfights even when it's less than a 50-50 in their favour and you have the clear advantage against them. Heroic forced BDS to drone all around the map next to whatever map control they were trying to take, and punished them if they didn't. They started to forfeit that aggression though, as despite still playing off-site positions or extended holds, the defences became a lot more vanilla as Shaiko mainly, but every player on BDS, started winning their fights as they were taking expected duels compared to the first few rounds where they were being shot from angles or locations they weren't considering, and BDS now ended the half with 3 attacking rounds heading to defence. Honestly, respect to Heroic though, as most teams moving to attack at 3-3 against BDS on a map like Oregon would never see the score be even again and wouldn't have enough to stop BDS collecting at least 4 defenses. So to see players like Thunder turn up with 4Ks on Twitch against the BDS defenders is impressive, as both teams collected 2 back-to-back rounds followed by a round each, leaving us going to overtime, where most people weren't expecting. The pressure was really on now for BDS, as a 1v1 clutch from Chaoxis put Heroic on match point with a chance to close it out the following round on defense. But who else would we trust more to put 2 rounds on the board when it mattered most than BDS, as they secured a flawless attack, followed by a near flawless basement defense and sealed the deal for them 8-7. Honestly, respect to both teams for putting on one of the best games of the split. Will this be the stage in 2021 where BDS finally secure that first spot? I sure hope so. And over to the second big match of the week, as Kayak once again found himself playing his old team on Clubhouse as G2 secured the flawless triple over Cowana this season, winning in another 8-7 match of the second week of games. Something that this match reminded me is that in the meta we are currently in, it's so hard to call something as a standard half or expected score, as so many games this season have gone against what the stats and averages would show you. At the moment, it really comes down to how each team measures up against one another and how their playstyles interact. So despite Cowana collecting what you might call a strong 4-2 attacking half on Clubhouse, it isn't really a surprise at this point that G2 were able to do the same thing on their attack to secure overtime. It was also no surprises that Citizen was the leader in a game like this, along with the fact that I think Clubhouse is one of his best maps in the map pool, attack or defense. As for Cowana, it was good to see the combination of Gorgona and Benja start to flourish, as before Benja joined, Gorgona was the guy who was usually bringing the most fragging power and keeping Cowana in that conversation with great gunning teams like BDS and Navi. So despite losing 7-8, it was nice to see Benja top frag again with 16 kills and Gorgona at 15. But when any player on any team drops 19 kills, with them all being so impactful, the support players only need to do half a decent job the opposition teams does, even if they are fragging too, as Citizen shut down Gorgona and Benja by himself, leaving players like Kayak and Yonka needing to just do their jobs. And they did, with good objective play by Yonka and a nice 1v2 clutch in the post plant on smoke from Kayak. And in overtime, back-to-back 3Ks from Citizen again was too much for Cowana, as they pulled the score back to 8-7 from 6-7, just like BDS in the previously mentioned matchup, G2 doing what Empire and Navi couldn't, and at least slowing down Covana's success against the top 4 teams from last stage so far in stage 3. There were so many close games in week 2, 8-7s and upsets, and it's honestly just a testament to the quality of competition around the world at the moment, as every team knows that this historical first ever stage 3 has so much to play for, and it's the last chance to avoid relegation or lock in those major spots to at a minimum secure points for next year's 6th Invitational. So credit to all regions for putting on a great spectacle. I really hope you enjoyed the vid. It took me a couple days longer than usual as I've had a busy week with commitments in real life, but as mentioned in my previous video, I want to see out this season knowing I've done a video for every week of pro competition, so here it is anyway, and I'm going to do my best to make up lost time and catch up for week 3's games which are going on now. And I hope you're having a good time viewing those games. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to stay up to date with all my Pro League roundups and other content here on the channel, and I'll see you again before you know it. Peace.